Okay, here we are in a sweet cherry planting. Right next to me here is a row where these were some extra trees that were left over from an NC 140 rootstock trial. I've got 4 different varieties on 2 different Gisela rootstocks here. This was planted in 2010, so it's 10 years old. This is Rainier on Gisela 3. Rainier's been a very consistent cropper. To tell you the truth, it's one of my favorite cherries to grow in this area because it just has a nice crop every year. And as you can see, it's got a pretty good crop this year. The downside, these Rainiers will probably, oh, this is Gisela 3. I like Gisela 3 at this 2-foot spacing because these trees are pretty nice size. If I was going to grow cherries in Massachusetts, which I won't, because they're probably not worth it. I'll tell you why in a minute, but I would do this because you can see that's a pretty nice look here to these Rainier cherries, and these will probably be ripe in about a week. I usually say they're kind of a July 4th cherry. As you can see, these Gisela 3 trees, for being 10 years old, are pretty darn nice. Also in this row, the next variety is Skeena. Skeena has, I'm not that impressed with it. It's got a nice crop on it this year. Not a lot of foliage though, so these cherries are going to be small. Seems to me that Skeena hasn't cropped every year. Again, Gisela 3, so for this 2-foot super slender axe cherry planting, going on 10 years old, these trees have been very manageable. Now, I think Skeena's fairly late. These probably won't be ready at least for another couple weeks. We've got a good heavy crop load here on them. We'll see how that goes. I meant to mention one downside of Rainier is they do have a tendency to crack if it rains. We were just talking about the dry weather this year. Actually, I think it's good for the cherries because they're not cracking. And right now, yeah, they could use some water, but if it rains, they'll probably start cracking. That's the problem with sweet cherries in this climate. This is Benton. I'm not terribly impressed with the name of this. Benton has been very shy cropping over the years. Now we're going to Gisela 5 rootstock, which is bigger than the Gisela 3. Frankly, for this 2-foot spacing, it's a little tight. The trees have had to really keep the tops down. They do have pretty good shoot growth on them, and these cherries, as you can see, are going to be much larger probably than the Skeenas. Actually, if this all comes to fruition, I think this is a fairly late cherry too. See, the birds are starting to eat them, so they must be getting ripe. This is probably going to be ready in about a week. That's Benton on Gisela 5. What can I say other than that? It's been such shy cropping that I don't really have any good memories of it. The last cherry variety in this row is Regina. Regina is the best cherry in the world. If A, you can get it to crop, if you can get the trees to live. It's very late, doesn't ripen until about July 15th. You can see these are still, it's a red cherry. Will become very nice and big and heart-shaped. Excellent eating. The problem with Regina we've had, these again are Gisela 5. Well, a couple problems here. One is getting the trees to crop. I've got some trees down there that hardly have any cherries on them. So it's known to be shy cropping, getting hard to get a good crop on. The other problem I've had here, actually these trees came in a year later than those trees. I've had no bacterial canker problems on those trees. However, this immediately on planting, the trees started to show symptoms of bacterial canker, and that, among other things, is one hard thing about growing cherries in the Northeast. And you can see the empty spots here. These are trees that have all succumbed to bacterial canker, and I'm sure if we look close, we can see some dead wood in some of these trees where the canker has gotten in. You can kind of, the top of this tree, it's not going to show up, is all starting to die. For some reason, this group of, I think the canker came in from the nursery, and once you get canker in a cherry tree, that's the end, period. It'll just start to go over time. Gisela 5, Regina, if I could figure out how to grow these, it's the only cherry I'd grow because it's head and shoulders above everything else in terms of fruit quality and very crack resistant too. But this little group's been problematic. We'll have some cherries here, but not a lot. Okay, so we looked at that super slender axe planting of sweet cherries. This row here was planted in 2005. This is every few trees are a different New York numbered variety selection. These came out of Bob Anderson's breeding program at Cornell University. The Pearl series of cherries, Black Pearl, Burgundy Pearl, and there's another one. Those were all the New York numbered ones too. I had some of those cherries up on the hill. Those are gone. This group of New York numbered cherries here, I don't think is ever going to be named or released to the public. There's some interesting cherries here. The crop is a little shy this year for some reason. These have been kind of, depending on the variety, a little shy cropping. But these trees are 15 years old, no bacterial canker to speak of, Gisela 5 rootstock. You can see how a very mature cherry orchard, you know, these trees are no more than 8 or 10 feet high, could be easily covered with rain covers. And that's, okay, so we talked about bacterial canker, that's a big problem with cherries. I mentioned the Rainiers have a tendency to rain crack. That's the other big problem with cherries, is sweets. Sweet cherries in particular crack if it rains, and as they're starting to ripen, which you can imagine is a problem. But, so these cherry orchards, if you're going to do it successfully in a humid climate, have to have a rain cover. We don't have a rain cover here in Belchertown. We're not here to make money. I'll talk about birds in a minute. But you got to cover these with solid covers of some sort, hay grove tunnels or whatever, to prevent cracking. Otherwise you're going to lose a lot of the crop. So New York numbered, there's 6 or 7 different ones here. We're not going to look at them individually because I'm probably going to cut these down this year because I'm tired of picking them, pruning them, and not getting a crop off them. Okay, we're on to the third row in my little sweet cherry variety evaluation block. This is a group of what's called star cherries. These were out of Italy. I was testing them for international plant management. I've heard that these trees are pretty hard to get a hold of. You know, this is Gisela 5. These were planted in 2012. Yeah, kind of an upright cherry tree, but not real vigorous. I kind of like the looks of them. The cherries are reasonably good quality. They kind of go by the names of Early Star, Grace Star. This one here is called La La Star. How could you not love that? Somebody, whoever invented the Benton name should have taken a lesson on how to name a cherry. But anyways, La La Star. There's Big Star. I can't remember. But anyways, again, I think if this group of cherries was covered with rain covers and kept the birds out, on the birds you can see this one here, I don't know for sure what it is, but this is getting close to being ripe, and the birds have been eating one step ahead with every ripe cherry. They just gobble them down. So that's the star group. I'm not going to talk any more about them just because I don't think they're going to be readily available. If they were, I think it's a decent cherry though for this neck of the woods. Okay, so those were sweet cherries. Now I got 2 rows of tart cherries. I believe these are Gisela 6 rootstock. I double checked. They're either 5 or 6. So you can get tart cherries. Don't call them sour cherries. That sounds terrible. Tart cherries on these Gisela rootstocks and make a fairly nice compact tree. We have 4 different varieties here. This is Jubileum, which is a very early tart cherry. This is out of one of the ones out of Hungary. It's called Erdi Jubileum. I don't know what's going on here. I had some Jubileum trees in a 2001 cherry plant that did fairly good, but we're having a problem in here with canker or something getting in to these trees. And the other problem I'm having, of course, they didn't have a big crop on them, but they had cherries in here, believe it or not. But the birds have eaten every single one. The cedar waxwings have eaten every cherry of Jubileum. So again, either has to be, the tart cherries aren't as susceptible to rain cracking, but the birds will eat them, so they need to be netted to keep the birds out. One thing about cherries is you really need to go on a good site. You don't want heavy soil, they don't like wet feet. They need a really good site, probably the best site on the farm. This has a tendency to get a little wet down this end, and we may have seen some problems with those Regina over there too. Regina's out of Hungary too, by the way. Germany, excuse me. So that might be part of the problem here, but if you look up the row a little bit, you can see we've lost some of these trees. That's Jubileum. Okay, this is Balaton, probably the most common tart cherry out of the Hungary program. It's been widely planted as a tart cherry. Again, having some problems here with canker, and trees are not doing terribly well. I've had Balaton here in the past and they've been okay, so I don't know what's going on. The thing I like about Balaton compared to Montmorency, which is kind of the standard, this is a much darker tart cherry. It's tart, but if you let it ripen up, you can eat it fresh. I imagine it's really high in antioxidants. Can also be used for baking. I prefer it way over Montmorency. Unfortunately, it can be a little shy cropping, and trees have a tendency to can suffer if they're not at a really good site. So that's Balaton. I forgot to mention that Balaton is fairly late harvested, probably the middle of July. We didn't get a close-up, but you can see those cherries were fairly yellow. This is Danube. This is kind of a sister or a brother to Balaton, a similar growth habit. Danube, the cherries though are earlier. I suspect some of these are getting close to being edible now, if you call a tart cherry edible. See the birds started eating them? Yeah, it's a pretty good indication. Oh yeah, there's a few bird pecks in there. The problem with Danube is I've seen it in other orchards, and again, the trees seem to want to die. I don't think it's terribly winter hardy. If I was going to plant Danube, it would be in the warmest locations winter-wise, and again on high sites. One thing I like to plant cherries on, we didn't do it here, but it's on berms, where the ground is mounded up a little bit to get that root system up out of the ground, out of the wet soil if there's wet. So this is Danube. It's going to come along in the next week or so if the birds don't get it. Okay, last one we're going to talk about is Montmorency. This is kind of the standard pie cherry. These will probably be ripe in a week or two. In general, Montmorency is good survivability. It's yellow flesh tart cherry. I mean, they stay really tart. I don't think you can eat these fresh. If you make a pie with them, you're going to have to put 4 cups of sugar in. But it's generally consistent, good, heavy cropper of tart cherries. Again, Gisela 5, these trees were planted in 2012, so they're 8 years old. You can kind of see with some pruning, we can keep them make a nice pick your own orchard for cherries if you wanted to do that. So the birds have not really started eating these yet. Again, they like to wait until they know when the cherries are ripe. Birds don't seem to like the tart cherries as much as the sweet cherries, although they will eat them. So I mentioned bird netting, rain covers, bacterial canker. You have to be able to manage all 3 of those things to pull off a crop of cherries. It's not like apples in general, so just keep that in mind. But this may be the final year for this cherry planting. We just don't have a market for the cherries here at the UMass orchard, and I have to prune them every year. It gets old. Anyways, that's my cherry tour.